Delivering packages seems like a normal job until you end up at the wrong address. Story 1. The app pinged at 11:42 p.m., a graveyard shift order for the Old Miller Estate. I'd been working the outskirts of the county for 3 years, but I'd never heard of any residential area by that name. The GPS led me onto a service road that wasn't paved, just jagged limestone that rattled my suspension and sent plumes of dust into the headlights. When the house finally appeared, it didn't look like a residence. It looked like a rotting molar thrusting out of the dark earth. There were no porch lights, no addressed mailbox, just a heavy, iron-wrought door that seemed to sag on rusted hinges. As I climbed out, the silence wasn't empty, it was pressurized. My boots crunched on dry leaves that sounded like brittle bone. I held the lukewarm bag of takeout tight against my chest, the smell of grease suddenly nauseating in the stagnant air. Don't look at the windows, I told myself, just leave the food and go. But as I reached the doorstep, I heard it, a rhythmic, wet scraping sound, like a butcher's blade dragging across a hardwood floor, coming from the other side of the wood. I pressed the buzzer. It didn't chime. Instead, it emitted a low, distorted hum that vibrated in my teeth. The door didn't open, but a slit at the bottom, meant for mail, slid back. A hand, or something that looked like a hand, though the knuckles were gray and impossibly elongated, pushed a stack of cash through the gap. The bills were damp, stained with something dark and viscous that smelled of copper and ozone. "Leave it," a voice rasped. It wasn't human. It lacked the melodic curvature of vocal cords, sounding more like air escaping a punctured lung. I set the bag down, my hands trembling so violently that the plastic crinkled loudly in the suffocating quiet. "Have a good night," I stammered, already backing away. I didn't turn my back until I reached the car. As I reached for the handle, a movement in the upstairs window caught my eye. A face was pressed against the glass, but the features were all wrong. The eyes were set too wide, and the jaw hung at an impossible, unhinged angle. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking at the bag of food, its tongue flicking out to trace the cold glass. I threw the car into reverse, spinning the tires until they caught. As I sped back down the limestone path, I checked the app on my phone to mark the delivery as complete. The screen blinked. Order canceled. Customer not found. I looked back at the house through the rearview mirror, but the road was empty. There was no estate, no iron door, only an overgrown field of tall, jagged weeds that hadn't been touched in decades. I looked down at my passenger seat. The cash was still there, sitting in a wet, darkening puddle on the upholstery. It wasn't money. It was just shredded strips of old, yellowed newsprint, stained crimson. I didn't stop driving until the sun came up, but I can still hear that wet, scraping sound every time I close my eyes. Story 2. The GPS signal died 3 miles back, leaving me to navigate by the harsh, flickering beam of my high beams. I was in the dead zones, a stretch of unincorporated county land where the pines grew too thick and the houses were spaced miles apart. My delivery app pinged, a jarring synthetic chime in the oppressive silence of the cab. Order number 8842, 1422, Blackwood Road. The house wasn't on the map. I found it only because the driveway, a jagged scar of gravel, suddenly appeared beneath my tires. It wasn't a house so much as a rotting structure of gray timber that seemed to be actively sinking into the marshy earth. There were no porch lights, no house numbers, just a sagging screen door that rattled in a wind I couldn't feel. I grabbed the thermal bag. My skin prickled with a primal, evolutionary alarm. This wasn't just a bad neighborhood. This was a place that felt discarded by reality. I stepped out. My boots crunched over something that sounded suspiciously like dried bone. I reached the porch, the wood groaning under my weight like a dying animal. Before I could knock, the screen door drifted open. "Leave it," a voice rasped. It didn't come from the doorway. It seemed to vibrate from the floorboards themselves. I peered into the gloom. The interior was a cavern of shadows, filled with the cloying, sweet stench of rot and wet fur. I saw movement, not human movement, but the wet, rhythmic pulsing of something thick shifting in the corner. I need a signature, sir," I managed, my voice sounding thin and pathetic in the heavy air. A hand emerged from the dark. It wasn't a hand. It was too long, the skin translucent and stretched tight over knuckles that bent at impossible, predatory angles. It didn't reach for the bag, it reached for my wrist. I didn't think. I dropped the thermal bag, the cardboard thumping dully on the wood, and bolted. I didn't look back until I reached the driver's seat, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I jammed the key into the ignition, my hand shaking so violently I nearly dropped it. As the engine roared to life, my headlights swept across the porch one last time. The entity wasn't in the doorway anymore. It was standing at the edge of the gravel, its limbs uncoiling like a spider's. It wasn't chasing me, it was watching me, its head tilted at a nauseating 90-degree angle. And then it mimicked my own voice perfectly, down to the tremor of fear. "I need a signature," the thing rasped. I slammed the truck into reverse, tires spinning in the mud, and didn't stop until I reached the paved main road. I checked my app an hour later, huddled in a bright, neon-lit gas station. The order had been marked as delivered. Beneath the confirmation, there was a single note from the customer. "Thank you, we were starving."